Are y'all finally diving into how European soccer, or should I say football, actually works? This is European football explained for clueless Americans like me. So yeah, I only looked at one video so far explaining how the leagues work, and I was actually very intrigued by some points in that. That will be linked at the end. The On Deck Circle will be linked down below, so you can check them out. Let's jump straight in. I'm ready to learn. Here we go.
Info that I wish I'd known a year ago. This is my crash course of translating soccer into American. I'm going to assume that you kind of know the rules. The biggest difference between American sports is how offsides works and the clock.
Offsides? I would have no idea. It's clearly different than offsides in, American NFL football, right? Because obviously offense and defense are set. And if someone moves before the ball is actually put in play, then that's offsides. The ball is constantly in play as far as I know in soccer, or I'm going to say football. So when I say football, you guys know what I'm talking about. If I'm referring to the NFL, I'll just say NFL football. The clock I know is like 90 minutes, right? That's all I know.
So people get upset about the clock. It goes up instead of down. Get over yourself. It doesn't really matter. Americans also get mad because the clock doesn't stop and games pretty much end whenever the ref feels like it. And you actually adjust to this pretty quickly. The game's an hour and a half long. You'll have your chances to score. And if you can't score, then it's not the clock's fault.
Right.
Some people, and when I say people, I'm referring both to discussions I've had with other Americans as well as like myself 6 years ago. So people think soccer is too slow. And when Americans look at a soccer field, something in our minds, we think that it's like playing hockey or playing basketball just on a big grass field. And in those sports, guys like go full tilt a lot, like most of the game. So when two players are just standing there passing the ball back and forth, we wonder, like, why aren't they trying to move forward? Just go. And on the other side, we expect the defenders to be attacking the guy with the ball rather than just standing 5 feet back. And
okay, that's not how I would see it. And here's why. In a very, very minuscule amount of football I've seen on TV or whatever, what strikes me is from certain angles, you can tell even on a TV screen how massive the field is. As far as I know, right, using no calculations here, I'm pretty sure these fields are really big. And you're covering a lot of distance, right? I don't know much about the sport, but I do know that you have to have hella cardio, ability to be able to maintain run around this field. It's huge. So I think the sport, you are constantly moving. I wouldn't call it slow. How can they manage to go from one field, one goal to another in a couple seconds? That's not possible. The field's too big. Hockey and basketball are played on really small courts. So if you're getting a fast break from one side of the court to the other, that's easy. It's not, you're not covering a huge amount of distance. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree that it's a slow sport. It's just so much bigger. It's a different dynamic. That's what I would guess.
He's doing. The key difference is that football pitches are much larger than basketball courts and hockey rinks. And if you tried a full court press for the whole soccer game, you would be exhausted and you would probably lose. So the pace of a soccer game is actually much closer to baseball. Most of the game is going to consist of guys just slowly passing the ball.
Not to mention, NFL football is slow. You have a play that lasts 6 or 7 seconds, and then everyone sits around for 40 seconds. And then they hike the ball, and then it's another 6, 7. Then, seems like every few minutes there's a timeout, there's a commercial break. American football is hella slow.
Around, real peaceful. And then it's going to be all of a sudden followed by these short bursts of extremely fast action.
All right.
Basketball players, it's estimated, run an average of 2.5 miles during a game.
Ooh, this
Soccer
is cool.
players can run 7, if not 10 miles during one game.
Wow. I think out of these, the hardest on your body would be tennis and soccer or football. I don't know why he's calling it soccer. That's kind of confusing because I know everyone's going to grill me in the comments. But yeah, I believe that you run totally huge distances in football. I'm going to call it football. I'm going to do the right thing. And then tennis, you're not running far. You're running. It's actually almost worse. I feel like tennis players deserve big props too because you're running in short bursts and then stopping and then running and stopping and juking and sliding. Like, dude, it's so hard on your joints and running these short distances. It's high intensity. So tennis is really hard, I think, too. But yeah, no doubt football requires insane endurance.
And remember, you only have 3 subs games, so most of these players will be playing the whole game.
I didn't know that. Wow.
One thing Americans will appreciate is that other than halftime, there are no commercials. So it's like the anti-NFL, which is great.
Now that's cool. That is the anti-NFL. Damn.
It also means
maybe that's why soccer isn't huge in the U.S. like the other sports we have here. Because they can't shove advertisements down your face every 5 minutes. Maybe that's why. I think for the fans, they'd enjoy it. You know, the corporations, they wouldn't.
No matter where the ball
pretty
is,
funny.
both teams are always potentially about 30 seconds away from scoring, which creates this kind of constant tension. It also creates a scenario where you can't ever really run to the bathroom or get a drink.
Oh, wow.
Soccer players seem to have a reputation for being lazy in the U.S. because they don't always pop right back up after going to ground and get right back into play. Certainly some players do embellish things and some go over the top, but I don't really think that on the whole it's quite the issue that people make it out to be. So they get made fun of in Europe too. So here's a fun experiment to try the next time you have a few minutes. Go to like a local field and then quickly jog laps around that field for like 10 minutes. And then suddenly sprint down the middle of the field as fast as you can.
Oh, you're going to be exhausted.
Halfway up the field, while you're still sprinting, have one of your friends just shove you over onto the ground. And if you can pop right back up and keep sprinting, then you can keep complaining about those guys. A lot of the time, they're just taking a little rest.
Yeah, he's got a point. You run around there and then sprint back and forth as hard as you can a couple times and then get pushed down. Yeah, see how you pop right up and keep going. No, I fully admit I'd be down like, oh, screw this. I'd be done, man.
Or want to either just keep playing around them, or
that's
both
hard.
Teams will be a little tired, so who cares? It's not a Matthew Riley novel out there. The other reason for guys slowly passing the ball around is that one of the strategies currently employed by most teams is to maintain possession as much as possible.
Okay.
Obviously, this is no different in American football or why Russia is really good at hockey. The other team can't score when you have the ball.
Right.
So
good point.
Teams will just pass the ball back and forth and even pass it back to their own goalie because it's better to go backwards with the ball than to maybe make a risky pass and let the other team have the ball.
Gotcha.
On occasion, you'll see a team make like 50 passes without the other team touching the ball, which can take a really long time, but then they'll go down and they'll score, and that's like as good as it gets. It's all about waiting for the precise moment for things to align.
Yeah, I'm sure one of the, soft negatives of the sport is, when you go get a drink or you decide to go to the, use a restroom or whatever, that's when the action's going to happen, right? You don't get that constant commercial break to do that. That's just, that's Murphy's Law. That's how it works, right?
And all going together at the right moment. In terms of like positioning and formations, you'll usually have 3 or 4 numbers, like 4-4-2 or 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1.
So, this is what I know nothing about, by the way. Basically, every team can have different strategies, but also different like formations, right? So, like this is a 4-2-3-1. So some teams might run this constantly, and another team might run totally different, right? I'm sure there's advantages. Some are more defensive-minded, maybe. Some are more just possessive-minded. It's in a way that they surround the other team, and when they get the ball, they're able to pass it around like in some sort of network, right? Or do teams just kind of all play different formations throughout the game? Maybe it's not as cut and dry as, this team has this formation all the time. I don't know. You can weigh in on that if you would like.
These numbers will always add up to 10, and then the goalie is just assumed. Different positions include the center backs, who just stay as defenders, and then the full backs are both the left and the right back, who will defend, but then they'll also usually join the attack as well. And then we have midfielders, like a center.
I've never even heard those terms. I have heard of midfielders, but not those first two he mentioned.
Midfielder, who can go both ways.
Okay.
A center attacking midfielder or a center defending midfielder.
All right.
And then up front, we have like a left wing and a right wing, sometimes a center forward, and a striker up front who will, it's his job to just score goals.
Never heard that one either.
One thing I'll mention that makes it easy to kind of get into soccer is that you can legally watch some old matches on YouTube. This is unlike American sports. Like, why isn't there a website that I can go to watch any game, like an iTunes for sports?
That's pretty cool. Wow. I may have to take a look at some old games for reference if they're super easy to find like that. I appreciate that. That's really cool. A lot of sports, man, it is annoying. You'd think they'd want to show you some history, right? A lot of sports are hard to access.
It's like
cool.
I can pay $2 to watch any game in history. Like all these games are on tape somewhere. They exist.
Yeah.
But I can't watch a game in the 1986 World Series unless an international pandemic shuts down the world and there's no sports. They just happen to put it on NBC or something.
Right.
Like, come on. So anyway.
It's a good point.
So keeping the ball and attacking is referred to as positive football. You're always trying to move forward. This is what most teams do. This is what people like to watch a little more. It's kind of exciting. It's more exciting to watch that way.
Right.
But of course, there's always a yin to the yang. So the yin is this guy named Jose Mourinho. And he basically says, I don't want the ball. I'm going to stand back with my players in front of my goal, and you're not going to score. And then every once in a while, when you're falling asleep and all your players are up in my zone, we're going to steal the ball and we're going to run down and score, which sounds a little bit risky, except that it actually does work if you do it well. Jose's considered one of the best managers there is, and he has the trophies to back it up.
That's pretty cool.
Plenty of big tournaments with teams that I'm told if you tried to have that team keep the ball the whole time, like most coaches would, they would have been destroyed. They were too old and they just would have got worn out and wiped out. But
so he has a strategy based heavily on defense first, but it can end up really working long term because it's so hard for the other team to score if this is done right. And then they get tired out, they get sloppy, you end up stealing the ball, and then you're able to charge down as a unit and probably score the ball after all. That's pretty cool. Wow.
But by playing this negative defensive strategy, they were able to win. And despite this, teams that employ this strategy seem to get a bad rap for playing negative as opposed to positive football because keeping the ball seems to be the in thing right now. So obviously there's more thought that goes into it than I've described here. Like Diego Simeone and Atletico Madrid has been using this negative strategy for years. There are four main football countries in Europe. There's England, Spain, Germany, and Italy. England has the Premier League, Spain has La Liga, Germany has the Bundesliga, and Italy has Serie A.
Okay.
So to take one country, they're all the same, but to take one country, England, the Premier League consists of 20 teams. Every team plays every other team, once at home and once away. And these leagues don't have playoffs. You get 3 points for a win, 1 for a tie.
Yeah.
The team with the most points
Which
at
I
the end
learned
of the
last
season
video.
wins. And this can and has come down to the final day of the season before. In the U.S., our leagues pretty much have the same teams every year. So if you suck, and even if you start to lose on purpose, you actually get rewarded with the top draft pick the next year.
That's what we alluded to last video when I was learning about the leagues only. And I do like how you have incentive to be good in European soccer or football, because if you're bad, you can actually get kicked out of the league. I think that's mind-blowing. I think that's really crazy, and it's something I've just never heard of, right? Here, teams are incentivized almost, if they're not top dog, they might as well be bad, so they can get rewarded with like more salary cap space, new draft picks, all these different things, right? It's kind of totally opposite, and it's weird.
If you finish in last place in one of these leagues, they literally kick you out of the league.
Yeah.
But
I think
they
that's
call it relegation
awesome.
because that's a nicer sounding word. Before we keep going, here's a quick aside on the MLS. Major League Soccer is the top league in the United States.
That's U.S., yeah.
It's different in many ways than the European leagues. There's no relegation, so the teams do stay the same from year to year.
Gotcha.
And there is a salary cap.
So it's just like every other American sport then.
Talent-wise, I guess
Or league,
globally
I should
speaking,
say.
it seems to be an okay league, but certainly not on par with any of the European leagues.
Gotcha.
So under the Premier League, which is at the top, under them is a league called the English Football League Championship. The 3 teams who finish at the bottom of the Premier League are relegated to the Championship for the next season and replaced by 3 teams from the Championship. The bottom 3 teams in the Championship are relegated to League 1. The bottom 3 in League 1 are relegated to League 2, whose losers go to the National League, whose losers are... nobody really cares about them except their moms at this part, but you get the idea. Unless you really get into soccer, you'll never hear about anything below the Premier League again. But
right.
Just so you're aware of what's happening down there. This system does a few...
But I do think it's really cool that, the last video I watched alluded to this, where, there's different, I think, tournaments, and then just the fact that you can kind of work your way up. Like, I think it's cool that there are certain scenarios where someone down here, and say, if we're talking about Premier League, so someone in the EFL Championship or even down to League One, they might be able to play a team in the Premier League. I think it's cool having matchups like that, where you can have a second or third level league team get to play the pros at the top. I just think that's a cool opportunity. Not to mention, how cool would it feel if you're a League One team, you're really, really good, you go up to EFL, you're really, really good again, and you can actually sneak into the Premier League after a couple years or something. That is so interesting to me, and it's just something I've never heard of in sports, with any of the sports I've ever followed here. I just think it's cool.
Things. First off, just because you're near the bottom of the standings, your games can still be extremely important. They still count because you're not trying to win the league anymore, but now you're trying to literally stay in the league. And the higher the league you're in, the higher the check you get from TV contracts. So it's kind of a big deal.
Right.
It also creates this kind of theoretical meritocracy where you could start a team with a bunch of guys anywhere in the country, get into a kind of a tiny league, and then ultimately work your way up to the Premier League.
It's a pretty
in reality,
crazy
that'd
thought.
be like trying to take a single-A baseball team and work your way up to the majors,
right?
While the other better teams with bigger pocketbooks are trying to buy all your best players the whole way. But for the teams at the top, just winning the Premier League sounds pretty easy. You're playing maybe one game a week. But that's the catch. There's other things going on here. So there's also the Carabao Cup, which is a tournament open to the top 4 leagues in England. And then there's the FA Cup, which has been going on since like forever, that it's literally open to every team in England. So over 700 teams entered this one tournament last year.
Holy smokes.
Imagine if every major and minor league baseball team had one giant tournament.
That's cool.
Could any team win? Yes, they could. Well,
that would never happen here, and that's why I think that's cool. Yeah, not all the time does it have to happen, but the thought of just 1 or 2 times a year where all these teams on various levels could face each other. There's something interesting from a spectator standpoint about, say, baseball, because that's even though I'm an NFL fan, but I'm actually a lifelong baseball fan, probably the most. That's why I played the most growing up. Even below AAA, AA, single A baseball, and then even down to just local, kind of not really attached to Major League Baseball, but like really abstract low. Like the fact that a small town team could play, the Chicago White Sox or the New York Yankees or the Boston Red Sox, like, that sounds cool to me. The major league team might end up stopping them, but maybe not, right? And that's why it'd be fun as a spectator, and it'd be fun for the players too. I just think that on that opportunity every once in a while sounds really refreshing and really cool. And it's not something you ever see here. But the fact that you could see that in Europe with football, I really like that. That is,
small teams upset the bigger teams.
It always stands out to me.
At some point, maybe a few will. But is it likely that a non-Premier League team is going to win? No, probably not.
Yeah, probably not likely.
More fun to think about in theory than.
But it's possible, and it's fun.
The final tournament.
It's opportunity for the Premier League team to prove we're the best of the best. Like, if you can't really stomp on this team that's levels below you, are you really that good, right? Like, it's kind of, there's multiple angles to it. I think it's fun.
The big one. Like, what if we could find the best team in Europe? And I don't mean like each country gets a team. That's the European Championship that happens every 4 years. This, I'm talking about the league clubs. So the best teams from all over Europe, from 55 different countries, battle it out each year. This is the UEFA Champions League.
Yeah.
So as a side note on these acronyms here, FIFA is the organization that runs like big international tournaments like the World Cup, and they help to coordinate things across different regions. The world is divided into 6 different regions. UEFA is Europe. That's where like the best players go. CONCACAF, you may have heard of because that's what the U.S. is in, the Confederation of North, Central American, and Caribbean Association Football. And then there's like the rest of the world. And each one of these groups has tournaments with national teams and their league clubs, like the CONCACAF Champions League and the UEFA Champions League. And these are called like the Champions League, but really it's just a tournament. So the UEFA Champions League is played in conjunction with the UEFA Europa League, which is kind of like the NCAA and NIT basketball tournaments, but with a bit of a twist. They play the qualifying rounds for the Champions League first. So if you get knocked out of the big boy tournament, but you finish high enough, you can just move down into the Europa League and try to win that. And I won't get into the qualifying, but typically you're going to have teams that you may have heard of as an American, like Manchester City, Liverpool, Manchester United, Tottenham Hotspur. From Spain, it'd probably be Barcelona and Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid. Serie A from Italy will have Juventus and Inter and Roma and Atalanta. Germany is pretty much dominated by Borussia Dortmund and Bayern Munich.
Yeah, and to be fair, showing how much I'm not well versed at all in this sport, there are obviously many Americans that would be able to name or even, are very familiar with all these teams. The only ones I've heard of is Manchester United, Liverpool, Real Madrid. That's it out of all these. So
Nick,
that's how much
and then there's
I
other
know,
popular teams
which
like
is not much.
Paris Saint-Germain from France and Lyon from France and Ajax from the Netherlands. And then you throw in a few Russian teams and you're ready to party. So back to the Premier League. You remember how your team's playing that kind of standard 38-game schedule. So now, also at the same time, you're competing in the Premier League, the Carabao Cup, the FA Cup, and the Champions League.
Jeez.
And there's like a bunch of other small one-off games happening too. So even if you have the best team, you're still probably not going to win all these tournaments just because of the wear and tear.
So this sounds hella busy, right? Is that fair to say? I'm just being honest. This is all very intriguing to me. It's interesting, right? It's also still a little bit cloudy, like confusing. I'm not like straight up confused, but I'm not going to act like I'm an expert after this video because I'm not, right? Like there is a lot to this. I feel like it's kind of layers deep, right? I mean, it seems like there's a lot going on. It's not cut and dry like you play your regular season. Then you play playoffs, then you play a championship, then you play maybe another championship after that. Like, no, this is all kind of intermingled. And I'm just kind of like, whoa,
If you can win 3 trophies in a year, that's like special. That's called a treble.
Wow.
If you win 4, that's called a quadruple. But that
sounds
rare.
hard. That sounds rare.
So the biggest payday is for winning your league, although I, for some reason, find the Champions League is hard to beat for excitement. So even though you can, soccer teams tend to trade players less than they do in the U.S. Rather, teams will just buy players from their current club. So a contract is going to include your salary, obviously, but also something called a release clause, which is a fee that would go to the current club for that player. So while any team could negotiate a transfer fee with a player's current club, a release clause takes that current team just out of negotiations altogether. So a baseball player unhappy with the situation, he could demand a trade, and they might trade him and he'd be happy. But if they refuse to trade him, then he's kind of stuck. Whereas a soccer player could just find another team willing to pay that release clause.
Oh, okay.
And once a team agrees to pay the clause, then they can just negotiate directly with that player.
So a really good player, a really valuable player, and the team he's on, they have to be kind of intermingled. They have to have a good thing going on, a good relationship. Otherwise, someone else could just buy them out. Is that what I'm getting at here with that whole release clause? Like at the end of the day, you want a good team as a whole, but a team has to kind of be good to really good players, right?
Obviously, the better player, the higher the fee is going to be, so the current club can go out and find a reasonable replacement. Another big difference is that while most sports in the U.S. have a trade deadline, and that's followed by a few weeks afterward where players cannot move to another team, soccer's kind of the opposite. So most of the time, you cannot move to another team. There are 2 periods a year called transfer windows that you can move during.
Okay.
So usually before and then halfway through the season. And you can sign a new contract for another team whenever, but you can't actually start playing for them until that next transfer window. And the last thing in terms of contracts is that in the U.S., most leagues have a draft, but soccer is pretty much like the Wild West. So teams will sign players, or I should say kids, like into their youth academy very young, like 10, 8 years old. And smaller teams who find a really good player could also include something called a sell-on clause when selling a player to a larger team that says if the team buying that player turns around and sells the player again to an even bigger club, then that original team will get a percentage of that secondary sale.
Alrighty, so I'm definitely going to be looking at more. This was really actually pretty cool. Learning about all the different positions and then, of course, how there's different strategies. Keeping the ball is like the popular strategy as a whole, right? And that's kind of a blanket statement. But, yeah, I mean, the more you have the ball, the more you have a chance to score. The other team doesn't. Makes perfect sense. At the same time, it's interesting how that one coach is known for being heavily on the defensive strategy and how it actually works. The guy's got a good trophy room, right? I think that's really interesting. I would love to hear your comments down below on what kind of strategies stand out to you. And then, of course, just, I don't know. I mean, there's so much to unwrap here. I mean, it's a whole worldwide sport that's arguably, I think it is the most popular sport in the world. I have just been left behind, right? I never got into it. It's not what I ever got into, and I feel like it's never too late, right? Like, better late than never. I feel like as a kid, I loved playing all different sports, and I kind of wish, I would have just taken a couple years and played football, played soccer as well. I think it just would have been educational, would have been fun. I've also heard, I don't know how true this is, I think it is pretty true, but I think as a whole, I'd say maybe, I don't know what the timeline is, maybe in the last 10 years, 5 years, I don't know. I think soccer or European football, I think it's really kind of exploded here in the U.S. finally. I think as a whole, we're kind of late to the game. It's always been here. And there were always pockets of Americans who have always loved and grown up with football, of course. But as a whole, I think it's always been overshadowed by basketball and baseball and NFL football and hockey and whatever else, right? So, yeah, hearing the different strategies, how big the field is, the movement, all that, I think it's really interesting. And not to mention the way it works with the leagues and the schedule and all these things and the integration between different levels. And it's just kind of so different than what I'm used to, and it makes it really intriguing to me. And it's a lot deeper than I would have ever guessed. I really think that part stands out to me the most. So yeah, I cannot wait to hear your thoughts down below. I always learn a lot from you guys. Keep your awesome suggestions up as well. I do appreciate it. I appreciate you watching. That's all I got for you in this one. My name is Ian. You're watching IWrocker. Until next time, y'all. I'll catch you later.